So, I imagine that most of you are probably familiar with the Moral Monday protests that occur in the state of North Carolina. We have covered them before here on the show, but if you're not familiar, essentially what it is it's a coalition of North Carolina progressives, North Carolina religious leaders who have regular protests at the Capitol down there to protest morally repugnant right-wing policies. And look, most of the time in the United States, religion in politics is used to justify, frankly, horrible things like discrimination, racism, sexism, homophobia. And as an atheist, I got to be honest with you, I think it's awesome that these religious progressives are using religion to try to fight evil right-wing policies, not actually trying to enact them. So it's really great. And look, the right has had a stranglehold on religion for far too long here in the United States. But these protests down, the Moral Monday protests are great. Really badass protests, badass protesters. They range from hundreds of people to sometimes thousands to sometimes tens of thousands. And since last April, I guess it's almost close to 1,000 people have been arrested protesting at the Capitol down in North Carolina on Moral Mondays. So these protests, frankly, they've gotten an okay amount of press. I mean, not nearly as much as they deserve, considering how sustained these protests have been and how consistent they have been. But it's gotten some mainstream media coverage. And so, because of that, the Republicans in North Carolina have decided to make it harder for people to protest. They have decided to make it harder for the citizens of their state, North Carolina, to use their First Amendment rights of speech and assembly, and they have in fact passed new rules to try to stifle protest and dissent at the Capitol in North Carolina. Now, because nothing says America, nothing says freedom more than arresting people for speech, arresting people for assembly. That's what America's all about, right? So look, not only is the act of stifling speech horrific, the language in the new North Carolina rules is insane. So I'm actually going to read the rules. This is actually from the North Carolina legislators' website. Okay, reading from their rules, quote, "Visitors to the complex may not disturb or act in a manner that will imminently disturb the General Assembly, one of its houses, or its committees, members, or staff in the performance of their duties." End quote. Okay, so look, according to these new rules, not only can they kick you out, not only can they arrest you for doing what they dub as a disturbance, right? Not only can they do that, not only can they kick you out and arrest you for supposedly committing a disturbance, but they can also kick you out and arrest you if they even think that you might make what they consider a disturbance. How insane is that? So what does an imminent disturbance even look like? The truth is, they don't actually say. It's not actually defined in their new crazy rules here. Though the new rules do have a list of what possible disturbances might be. This is, again, from the actual North Carolina new rules that are at the Capitol. Quote, "Making a noise that is loud enough to impair others' ability to conduct a conversation in a normal tone of voice while in the general vicinity, and may include singing, clapping, shouting, playing instruments, or using sound amplification equipment." End quote. Or, to put it another way, essentially any type of political protest ever. That's what, you've been to protests, you're listening, I'm sure you've been to marches, I'm sure you've been to protests. That is what all protests are. So there's no raising of voices, no shouting at the North Carolina Capitol anymore. So if you want to have a protest, if you want to speak your First Amendment rights at the North Carolina Capitol, apparently you need to whisper now. You need to whisper. You got to be like, "What do we want? What? I said, what do we want? Oh, change. What? Change. Oh, okay. When do we want it? What? never mind. It's so insane. So what does imminent singing look like, right? What is imminent singing? What does that mean? Is it taking in a deep breath? Is it doing a vocal warm-up? La 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 la. Is it something like that? What does imminent clapping look like? It's like, hold it right there, sir. Hold on a second there, sir. Your hands are apart. Your hands are apart, sir. I believe, sir, you are about to imminently clap. Sir, you are under arrest. Put your hands up in the air, but whatever you do, do not wave them around like you just don't care. I mean, look, not only are these horrible people, not only are they trying to stifle actual speech, they're also putting restrictions on where their stifled speech can actually be. Free speech zones, or imminent free speech zones, I guess you could call them. So, reading from Think Progress, they actually have a summary here. So, quote, the rules, which were supported by a majority of Republicans but opposed by Democrats, also place limits on where protesters can gather at the General Assembly, especially on the main South entrance, the site of many previous Moral Monday protests. Groups that expect to involve between 25 and 200 people are allowed to reserve space at the South entrance, but the same location, quote, may not be reserved for coordinated activities the person or group reasonably expects will involve more than 200 or more participants, end quote. So, look, these Moral Monday protests, they've sometimes had thousands of people there. They've had thousands of protesters there. So, according to these new rules, I guess they're out of luck. If they actually want to, gather enough people, they want to gather and actually organize and get thousands of people down there, which they have in the past, they can't do that anymore. Though what they could, quote, legally do in that space, they couldn't sing, they couldn't shout, they couldn't clap, they couldn't even imminently sing, shout, or clap. Now, look, obviously, this is clearly unconstitutional. It's obviously unconstitutional here. But not only is this in violation of the United States Constitution, because it is, but it's also specifically in violation of the North Carolina Constitution when it comes to the actual Capitol itself. So I'm going to read, this is actually from Article 1, Section 12 of the North Carolina Constitution. Article 1, Section 12 is actually titled, Right of Assembly and Petition. And their Constitution states, quote, the people have a right to assemble together to consult for their common good, to instruct their representatives, and to apply to the General Assembly for redress of grievances, end quote. Their Constitution literally states that the people have a right to assemble and instruct specifically the North Carolina General Assembly. That is what they're doing. But apparently now, if they're going to do it, they better do it in a whisper. Or even if they do, a cop might think you're about to imminently shout, and they can arrest you there. And you better not do it with more than 200 people. You better not do that, or they can arrest you. Or if they think maybe more than 200 people there, they can kick you out and arrest you then. There's also an unquestionably racial element to these new rules that have been put in place. I think Progress actually had a quote from the Reverend William Barber, who is the head of the North Carolina NAACP. Reverend Barber said about the new rules, quote, these changes in the rules that defines acceptable speech as what they consider normal is, we believe, not only a violation of the First Amendment right to free speech, but is highly offensive and prejudicial to African Americans, minorities, women, the poor, LGBT people, and faith communities who have been historically criticized for being abnormal to the so-called mainstream of our country whenever they have chosen to protest. This attempt to characterize certain speech as abnormal and contrary to civility is a trick as old as when opponents of civil rights, women's rights, labor rights, and LGBT rights accuse their neighbors of being too loud or too uncivil when they challenged unjust and mean-spirited laws. End quote. The Reverend is absolutely right. He is 100% right here. And look, the truth is, folks, when laws are unjust, when they are wrong, when they are doing absolute wrong, we should be uncivil. We should be mad. We should scream. We should yell. We should clap. We should sing. Our rage should be imminent. You know what I mean? And when politicians make ridiculous rules like this, it really shows a lot of things, but it shows, in my opinion, two big things, two huge things, right? So it shows, one, that despite what they say, despite all the talk and the flag waving and the USA and the Pledge of Allegiance and all that stuff, people like this hate freedom. They hate freedom and they hate democracy. They are afraid of speech. And look, North Carolina is one of the most gerrymandered states out there. They really do hate Nebraska. There's a very large population of Republicans in North Carolina that flat out hate democracy. The other big thing that it shows us, frankly, is that they're scared of us. They noticed us and they're scared of us. And so that's a good sign. That's a sign that progress is being made. Not enough, but progress is being made. You're going to be happy to hear that this last Monday, at the Moral Monday protest, the Moral Monday protesters, despite these ridiculous new rules, they still showed up. And they said they're coming back next week too. And the week after that. They're not going anywhere.